Good afternoon. Welcome to the lecture notes for Feminism and White Privilege. This is, forgive me for, getting this out a little bit late. The major point of this lecture is about intersectionality. There is a definition on the slides for intersectionality, which is basically when considering one form of stratification for a set of people, it's also important to consider the other forms of stratification. So when you're having discussions about race, it's important to consider class. It's important to consider gender. When having conversations about gender, it's important to consider race. It's important to consider class. Oftentimes, we are blind when it comes to these things. When it comes to, basically not being intersectional at all. So overall, when it comes to this, you can argue that this is the third wave or the fourth wave. Me personally, I kind of believe like this is the fourth wave of the women's rights movements, where you have the first wave, late 1800s going up to the 1920s, women's suffrage, women's right towards citizenship. Second wave, 1950s and 60s and 70s, really talking about women's rights in the workplace, the rights against workplace discrimination, the rights against sexual harassment, equal pay, etc. The third wave in the 90s, I personally think that there was a third wave in the 90s, which focused a lot on culture and focused a lot on changing the culture. We've kind of crossed most of the legal lines in terms of creating equality between men and women, and real equality between men and women would have to be done on a cultural level, which takes a little bit longer. Like a 90s feminist was like, why should I have to wear these uncomfortable shoes? Why should I have to wear these uncomfortable clothes? Why do I have to wear makeup? Why do I have to objectify myself as a woman when all I want to do is just be comfortable and to have, less, to be able to thrive in my work environment without my sex or my gender being something that is a factor in all this. We're in a fourth wave now, which is dealing with just brand new stuff, just brand new terminology, etc. And so what's interesting is that what a lot of people don't want to admit is that like this current form of the women's rights movement and the concerns of the women's rights going into the 2020s honestly is mostly a middle class white female movement. And oftentimes when you're engaged in a movement like that, you forget to do that intersectionality. You forget to do, to take a look at all the other intersections, like most of the things that are being voiced and dealt with, and the major concerns really just deal with white middle class women. So that's both class and race that are being left out of there. And I usually like to give the example of like the civil rights movement of the 1960s. Civil rights movement in the 1960s was a movement that focused on race, but was very sexist, incredibly sexist movement, where it was mostly, you have like the Rosa Parks and a few other people in there, but like most of the leaders were men. And most of the leaders kind of told their women, their wives and their sisters and their mothers and etc., just stay home and do your job as a woman. Stay home and take care of the home. Very sexist movement. Very anti-racist movement. But not anti-sexist at all. And so the modern women's day, so what you're supposed to get out of the reading for today is the idea that like maybe the modern women's rights movement doesn't consider race enough. It doesn't consider class enough. Where your ceiling is kind of like, we want to see more female corporate executives. We want to see more female presidents. We want to see more women in power. That's a upper middle class concern, versus those that are like, I just want equal pay. I just want a living wage. I just want the right to not be harassed and groped and sexually assaulted in my workplace. Something that those that are upper middle class think that like, well, that's a past concern. It's not a past concern. It's a current concern. And so that's all I wanted to do and to bring into this. So important definitions are about patriarchy and how we are still kind of undoing the tenets of our patriarchal culture from centuries past. the role of women, the role of men, and the biological differences between the two. Obviously introducing sexism and feminism. And, according to this definition, keep in mind, feminism is a lot more simple than you think. I consider myself to be a feminist because according to the definition, it's just those that advocate for equality between men and women. That's it. That's all that's being asked for there. But some people get it confused and add a whole bunch of other stuff to what that definition means. Also keep in mind that I provided two definitions for race and racism, two definitions for racism. And I'm offering both, and I'm not saying which one is correct and which one's incorrect. It's just kind of in the eye of the beholder. There's the power version of racism, which says that only those that have power can be racist. So those that believe in that definition believe that people of color, black people, Latinos, etc., cannot be racist because they do not hold large-scale societal power, and only white people can be racist. And then there's